Thank you, Mohamed. We aren't too far behind time. So, one of the objectives of research is to have industrial development. And now we're going to talk about that, the economic and industrial development, with one moderator whom I really like, who is Laetitia BROTTIER, who is an industrialist. She's going to talk about hybrid solar, photovoltaic and thermal for the same apparatus, for the same device. And I'd like to call all the different speakers to come and join us here at the table. Thank you. So while the various speakers take their seats, I'd like to tell you that we are going to mainly talk about photovoltaic in this roundtable on the economy and industry. Because we had to choose, we had 1 hour to talk about economics. Thermal solar is very dear to DUALSUN. It's a key technology. And for the next PP, we will reach 6 terawatt-hour of thermal solar, so 1 square meter of solar thermal per year. You can see the potential of thermal solar. And we will mainly talk about solar electricity with all our various speakers. André JOFFRE, who is the founder of TECSOL and the president of the DERBI Competitiveness Center and the vice president of ENERPLAN. There'll be David Marshall, who is the executive joint director of the ADEME expertise programs, Pierre-Emmanuel Martin, CEO of Carbon Solar and Vice President of Industry ENERPLAN, Daniel MUGNIER, in charge of the PVPS program, Photovoltaic Power System, at the International Energy Agency, Jules NYSSEN, President of the Renewable Energy Trade Union, and François, SILLION, Chief of Digital Technology at the National Space Center. I'm going to talk about the economic value of the photovoltaic. Photovoltaic between 2022 and 2035 should account for 100 billion euros invested in France. This could reach up to 25% of the consumption of electricity in France. We are at 4 right now. And for the next PPE, we're talking about 100 gigawatt, 65 to 100 gigawatt for 2035. Now, why so much interest? Can you tell us about the competitiveness and the basis? Why so much love for this, so much interest? Well, I would like to ask, is there so much interest? And the discussions this morning show this clearly. And in the documents under consultation, although everybody is aware of the constraints that can exist to deploy solar renewable energy, we have to try to do our best instead of having limitations. And I think it is obvious the specific energy situation in France is such that we are focusing on certain specificities of solar energy. The fact that we can have nuclear power plants also, and there are topics related to biodiversity, etc. Those are the limiting factors. It's not the interest in solar energy as such. It was said several times. I like to say I have 11 children. These are the 11 renewable energy lines. I have no favorite. They're all useful. And today we know that wherever we have the greatest possibility of growth, it's in solar energy. So long as we can do this on all kinds of grounds, and not just on roofs and on degraded areas. So long as it is accepted by society, that's also very important, and that's what we're going to discuss. We cannot have a solar ambition without having an industrial program. And in terms of political and social acceptance, that's also very important. Solar energy is competitive. This was said earlier on. We tried to carry out an honest study on all the segments, the types of facilities, agricultural, degraded sites, and with the latest data, we have 65 megawatt hour, and we have to update that with nuclear energy. So competitiveness is no more a topic, and it justifies the solar energy, which is decarbonized via the long-term programming also. So solar energy is the cheapest, 65 euros per megawatt hour. So before talking about industry and gigafactories in France, I wanted to give the floor to the National Space Study Center to go back in time, because in 1973 they were the main sponsors for this event at the UNESCO. And the CNES would themselves manufacture their photovoltaic cells to embark them in space. So these were industrialists. And today you buy these cells, but you still embark solar photovoltaic cells. So what is the issue at stake here for these purchases? Is this module a commodity, as we hear sometimes? Are there technological issues, location issues? Because this is a specific market, the market of our space industry. So I have a huge responsibility to talk about our story. Yeah, we don't manufacture anymore, and space is developing today, and we don't need gigafactories. But the constraints of space are such that in terms of the lifetime, once we have put a system in orbit, we're not going to intervene on it. So therefore, we need a long life cycle. And at the beginning, space attracted the development of photovoltaic panels. And today we're wondering whether supporting this growth, which is very strong, we're launching thousands of satellites every year. Each satellite has on board its own generation system with solar panels. A geostationary satellite, I think it's 2 times 50 square meters of solar panels. And since the enemy of space is weight, you can imagine this. These systems are very sophisticated, of origamis to deploy and unfold. So we have very strong constraints in terms of mass and performance in terms of our solar cells. Now, until recently we would use things with triple junctions, arsenium, gallium. We were not using the silicon that we are using currently on roofs. With the boom in the demand for satellites, today we don't have the industry to manufacture enough of these high technology cells, high capacity cells. So the question is to take into account all these elements taken from the public at large to use them in space. So there's the digital treatment, the control, the monitoring, the way to balance the loads, see how we can manage the electric system and the energy system all together instead of looking at the highest performance at each step.
Au niveau des de l'industrie, on avait beaucoup parlé
in the industry this morning, we talked about a major investment in China. because since 2011, China has invested $50 billion in its economy for the industrial development of the photovoltaic. So these aren't amounts that are invested today in Europe, and they're the leaders in the 5 manufacturing steps, with more than 80% of the global capacity in polysilicon, celluling, moduling, etc. All the key steps for the manufacturing of our solar panels. And today we have cost prices that are given in the report, which talks about costs of $154 per kilowatt of modules produced. It can go down to 92 in 2030 and 71 in 2040, according to this report. However, in France, we don't have just one gigafactory, but 2 gigafactories that are today in our pipeline. And I would just like to mention Holosolis, and they will be installed in the eastern part of France. And we have Pierre-Emmanuel Martin for the carbon solar gigafactory. Now, Pierre-Emmanuel Martin, why an industry in France? Do we have the right conditions for success?
Good morning. There are 2 gigawatt projects. First of all, I'm very happy to be here. I come from this ecosystem that you are representing, and we represent the continuity of these 50 years of history. I'm very chatty and I like anecdotes, and I was 7 years old at the time, and my love for sun power came in very early. We had Photowatt, which was very close to home. So all of these little items made me into who I am today. France is the country of electricity in my mind. And after dominating many industries, electromechanics, hydropower, and so on, it's sad to imagine that the story is not going to continue. So when I was part of the Observatory of Renewables, I was part of the first barometer, and Photowatt was a major leader in PV arrays. Today in France, we produce twice as much solar panels as China does. So obviously, you have to look at the big picture. You have China who has the monopoly of producing. Of course, we have to thank them. They invented competitive solar energy, but we will focus on tandem energy solutions. We will use the excellence of what we can do in Europe. This is the goal of carbon. It's to analyze the errors of the past, especially in the PV solar industry. First of all, we have to say that we are at the very heart of a re-industrialization process, and it's very important to focus on our French-German friendship. We looked at our neighbor and we decided not to do like them, and we fought over some of the industries where we were doing quite well, and because of that it all went to China. So it's very important to create bonds, strong bonds with Germany, to be able to propose good solutions. So the creation of carbon came from that, to recreate the conditions of a resilient industry on polysilicon equipments, and to do like the Chinese. Production costs, you multiply volumes. The more you produce, the more competitive you are. It's quite simple as an equation. So yes, we have an ambition. We want to be the world champions, right? Like all kids, when they start practicing a sport, they want to be a champion. They don't want to be a regular football player. So the idea is to win this battle, win this game, and to be in the top 10. So today, carbon is 5 integrated gigawatts, a plant in Fos-sur-Mer, which is going ahead. We will need funding, obviously. We will need a lot of resilience on many value chains, which are at the hand of the Chinese. We have to be careful. The ingoting process is not yet fully mastered from an industrial point of view. In terms of cells, we have the entire value chain to have the right equipment in Europe, but we need to be careful once again. And we have a sister ship in Germany. We have 5 gigawatts working with partners to have a similar project to win this game. And we might produce. So there are a number of externalities, but our products will be traceable. We have plants which are part of a environmental regulations. We have to look at impact studies. It's very complicated. 62 hectares on the harbor of Marseille. And we will have products which will become increasingly competitive. We want to have a competitive solar watt-hour. We need tandem energy. We need perovskites, nanostructures, and research communities that support industrialists. We want to be partners. That's 5% of the sales figure. It will be 250 million in terms of expenditure dedicated to R&D. And so for the youngest here, remain in solar energy. We have a wonderful journey to ride for the next 10 to 15 years. Pierre-Emmanuel, do you need a framework which is boosted by Europe to start working? Or are you already working within an existing framework without having to modify it? No, let's not be naive. The Chinese don't want, now that they have the upper hand, it's the 7th pillar of China, solar energy. They have a constant planning for many years. It's a technology that they master from A to B. It's a lot of energy that is being produced. They are installing 450 megawatts in the desert of Gobi. So you have an incredible installed capacity. These are astronomical quantities of energy. They don't need us at all, in fact. And if they want to harm us, they might say we will no longer distribute any solar arrays or equipment. So they are manipulating prices at the moment. They have a monopoly. They are the only buyers of polysilicon and the only sellers of wafers. So we have to protect ourselves. In Europe, over the last 50 years, we had the time of peace, and then the time of freedom and exchanges, and now it is the end of being naive. It's the time for reconquest. So we are working on the Net Zero Industry Act. There are many interesting things being developed in Germany and in France in a coordinated manner with resilience premiums or bonuses. We expect a lot from that because tomorrow the sector will be in the hands of large developers or large retailers. They don't care about solar arrays made in Europe. They want cheap products. So we have to defend ourselves in light of this.
Très beau projet.
Yes, a wonderful project. Thank you. So we were talking about resilient criteria. During the Green Industry Act, there was an Article 23 for parking lots. There was a proposal to change the deadline to adhere to this resilience criteria at a later stage. So is there an antagonism between a rapid development and taking the time to have these gigafactories? What does accelerating mean? Do we need to fast-track this process or not fast-track as fast? Yes, about parking lots for large supermarkets. They don't want to meet these demands because they have an artificialized assets. So we have to be mindful of that. Also, some use the French industrial sovereignty to undermine the PV solar energy industry. So we have to be careful. You explaining to people that we should develop PV solar energy, and saying that it means that we should foster the development of these carbon projects and gigafactories. So it's not easy when everything is shown as being black and white. So if we look at France or Europe, last year we had slightly more than 15 gigawatts that was installed. We're looking at 110 for 2030. There's a lot of ambition, so there's room for everyone. In this market volume, we can do this together with bonuses for local content or carbon content criteria. But for local content, we have to find the right way to proceed, and we should review the weighting criteria for the prices in the tenders and the bids. So this will be part of next year's presidential campaign. So we have a solar pact to make these commitments more tangible. And when we look at solar arrays, when we install them, it's part of the entire value chain. So we have to rebuild this industry, which existed in the past. We have to continue our research and to translate this research into concrete output and concrete projects. So we need to work on those two aspects. The more momentum we have, the bigger the cake, and the more room we have to create the conditions to start these gigafactories. Once they come out of the ground, they will be very competitive, and we support this fully. So these gigafactories will need relative investment. In ADEME, the Energy Transition Agency, how do you see this financial support to be brought to these gigafactories and the momentum around it? Yes, at ADEME. Well, ADEME was born at the same time as solar energy in France. So we've supported innovation in the field of PV for a long time, but in 2010, the 2010s, there was the arrival of future, what we called at the time, future investments, which was a way to support large demonstrators. So we have the France 2030 program. We have 9 billion euros dedicated to about 15 strategies, one dedicated to energy systems, 1.5 million euros for that. So France 2030 aims to accelerate this. We go beyond just innovations, but we're trying to detect all of the obstacles to deploy a specific technology. We look at the impact of this technology. So there are different ways to support this. At ADEME, we operate 3 bids called TAS, small SMEs, demonstrators, and the industrialization part. So what is important is to recognize the weight of these. Since the beginning of France 2030, 2 years ago, we've initiated thousands of call for projects, and many of them are funded. In the field of renewable energy, we had 800 million euros in terms of budget. 60 budgets are funded, 60 million euros. Obviously, there are other projects which are not yet funded, so 50 million euros in terms of budget, and 12 projects on issues that go from recycling and specific modules for large installations in the industry and so on, and also the perovskite tandems. So it's very varied, in fact, not to mention the applications. Last, there's the involvement of state. There's a tax credit for green innovations. This will allow us to offset various American bills that have had a negative impact on our economy. There's a process to make sure that the investments supported by this tax credit are part of this process. So beyond modules, there's the issue of systems to bring economic value to France. And today, there's the issue of, is it the right time for PV solar energy? What about the intermittent nature of those systems? Why should it be successful for our grids or networks? So let's look at the right timing for developing solar energy. I have to say that I'm very pleased about these discussions since this morning. To have researchers and industrialists working together. This is what I do on a day-to-day basis. In my capacity, we have researchers and industrialists with local authorities who help us, and it works very well. We often have to fortify these relationships. Sometimes we work in silos, and there may be collaborative programs focusing on R&D. This is good for researchers and industrialists who often are struggling to really take action. So thank you, Daniel. Congratulations, because you were able to set this up, and it seems to be working so far. So in the industrial life of science, sometimes we have interesting phenomena. An example of this is the creation of the iPhone. You remember 15 years ago, it's not that old, and what happened? Why did the iPhone arrive? Because all of the components that are inside, all of the components, you have a word processor, you have your agenda, you have all of these features, and no one had done that. To put them together, you had to put all the jigsaw pieces together. And how could we do that with screens which were not too expensive, that we could touch? tactile screens, and then also lithium batteries. Lithium batteries, the first patents date back from 1973, when we had the first congress of this first solar congress. And this English researcher working in New York had a Nobel Prize for the discovery of lithium batteries. Without that, we wouldn't have electric cars or iPhones. And why am I saying this? Because in terms of solar energy, we had something similar. It's the same as with smartphones. Because at the same time, it wasn't set in stone. We had competitive prices for solar energy. It has been said again and again, a very cheap energy. And it's not intermittent. It's variable. It's different. It's a different story. Right, Laetitia? Among ourselves, we should use the right words. Let's not use the words of our enemies, such as intermittent. So, solar energy has become very competitive. We see it in all types of areas, and the good news is it's going to keep going. We should divide by 2 the price of PV modules by 2030, and there was a study that came out yesterday that showed other accomplishments. But what we didn't expect, it was the electric car, the rise of the electric car. Who would say that by 2030 we would have 2 million electric cars? It's 100 gigawatt hour. In France, 5 gigawatt hour of batteries, lethal batteries. They weren't bought for that. They were bought for mobility reasons. They are almost free, those batteries. And this phenomenon is extraordinary because 5 gigawatt hour, it's quite a figure. So if we put them together, we can imagine plenty of things. And you will say, well, the electric car is to travel. It's not stuck next to our homes. No, it doesn't. It won't travel more than conventional cars. So 90% of the time, it's not being driven. You should plug it very easily with any solar plant that is available. And this is something we are already doing. We are already practicing that. We know how to do it from an administrative point of view. With we already do that in small areas, but it's just an administrative decision to upscale that. You plug in your car in your charging station that your boss has made available to you, but this station will deliver electricity for your own use. And potentially, when you go back home, you plug your car and you remove the peak hours. In the United States, Tesla has just won 2 licenses for 2 average cities in Texas, where they're already practicing this. They have positioned themselves as power suppliers, and they supply electricity for those who have a Tesla car. And in exchange, the car is available, except if you need it for an emergency or going somewhere. So the car can be used by Tesla to consume electricity during peak hours and therefore to reduce the average price of electricity. And Tesla guarantees the best price in Texas. So I think there's a lab in the north of France next to Lille who is working for Tesla, but I haven't completed my investigation. So I think something is going to come out very soon. So there will be lots of initiatives similar to that one. And this will take us further and higher than just solar energy. We will find fields of applications that we don't suspect. And of course, when the time comes, we will say, yes, it was before our eyes the entire time. So we need to focus on value creation. I was an industrialist for many years, and, it's tough. It's a tough environment. I spent 10 years doing that, working in the industry. And it's tough, I can say that. But we need it, obviously. But In some professions, maybe it's easier because you have, for example, the digital world. If you have a startup company with a few computers, you can do something extraordinary. But looking at the variability of solar energy and needs and how you monitor all of this is a source of value creation which is considerable. And this is what we should focus on. It's part of solar energy. It is solar energy, even though it may be used elsewhere and can have other applications. But it is essential to continue this solar energy process, so it is fully part of society. So the smartphone phenomenon will be applied to the solar field. So we talked about California. And we will continue taking a step back to talk about South Australia. Daniel Munier, who is in charge of the PV power systems, and he will give us some feedback in South Australia in 2005. In terms of energy power production, it was 100% of fossil fuels. Now they have a lot of PV power, not yet electric vehicles. But what is the situation there? Thank you very much. First, a short introduction. PVPS is a satellite program of the International Energy Agency. It was created in 1974. The aim is to federate. This morning we had the Federation of Researchers, and here it's an international federation with 200, 300 researchers working on solar applications. It's very interesting to take a step back. But I would like to show you the future after what André has presented. I think it's the right way to go forward. In Australia, it's what Europe will look like in the future. So in southern Australia, in this region, there was a huge development of PV installations in the 2010s. It was a regional phenomenon, really in the south of Australia. And South Australia was a pioneer in terms of the coverage in this state, which is not very interconnected. So in 2015, 36%, 70% in 2022. And the goal is to have 100% of renewables by 2028. So you may think that there will be issues of balance. Do they have blackouts? But in fact, it works really well. You have a day in October here in 2023. On that day, at noon, solar noon, you had as much solar production as consumption, and the system was able to hold. Well, obviously, the consumption is specific to daylight, and we have ways to stabilize the energy, and we have a dynamic way of monitoring electricity consumption. So this shows us what we will have to implement on a European scale, not tomorrow, but in a few years' time. And it's really fascinating, because in this country, they're just starting equipping themselves with e-vehicles. So it's something that will come soon. And I would like to talk about an initiative which is like a research laboratory on a one scale, something that we can test. The Grid Manager, SAPN, set up a campaign for any PV small-size system. They say either you limit the power that can be injected into the grid, or you can have a dynamic monitoring, so you can change this limitation of injecting PV solar energy onto the grid. And what is amazing is that the tests show that more than 95% of the energy on a yearly basis is fully distributed and is usable. So it's only the beginning. And it also shows, I was hearing about negative prices this morning. We are going to increase production means, so we have to really focus on the implementation of this flexibility. Because we believe that production or power generation will increase much more rapidly than a passive phenomenon that would be controlled by the market. So that's important. Second message I want to convey very briefly, another aspect that comes from international experience, and that is the topic of hydrogen. Moving on to the next slide. Since we work together with the International Energy Agency, and they weren't as interested in solar energy in the past. So we decided to do some fact-checking on hydrogen and hydrogen programs on a world scale. And what we can see clearly with the resources of the International Energy Agency, they are able to measure the development and the perspectives of developing the hydrogen sector. You see governmental objectives in terms of production. They are very ambitious. However, in front of that, if you look at demand, there's a warning here because we're not ready yet. And again, we could say the market will be very smooth, the demand will come very rapidly, and there will be a match, and hydrogen will meet a demand. But in fact, it's not as easy. If you look at the demand creation mechanisms, you need an attractive price, whether the hydrogen molecule is transformed or not. So you need to support, as was explained this morning, in setting a feeding tariff, so creating the conditions so that green hydrogen can be off-taken, meaning that there's a real demand for it. And then we will reach the ambitions of our full rollout of this variable but very predictive energy.
Merci beaucoup, Daniel. Je voulais donner maintenant la parole.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I wanted to give the floor to François Sillon, because, knowing that we had the National Space Center around the table, I had a lot of questions, because they have projects of PV plants that would be operated in orbit. There was a project in Japan or in the UK, and also in China. Once again, with the JOFFRE program, which means chasing the sun. And there was also a nice success with a space solar power demonstrator, which basically is a project about a proof of concept of a first plant that would be coming on the market with microwaves that could be retrieved on Earth. It was Isaac Asimov's dream. He described that in his novels. But it seems like it's about to no longer be science fiction. But this high energy bundle might actually be arriving on the markets and might be of use if it was operating in orbit. François, what can you tell us about that, about what's going on outside of the Earth? Well, yes. The upside of putting photovoltaics in orbit is that, well, first of all, you don't have the problems with the atmosphere that actually absorbs part of the sun's radiations, and you can have a remote orbit, in which case you would not have problems related to the shadow of the Earth. So there are quite a few upsides to generating power with photovoltaics in orbit. But then the question is, how do you convey this power to the Earth? It's a little bit more complicated because you could have high energy rays or beams. But at CNES, we are not sure of how beneficial it would be, because you have to look at the cost to set up the project, to launch the project, and to convey the energy back on Earth. We're not sure that financially, economically, it would be viable. But as you said, there is a need for energy also in orbit, because, as we said, we are using space devices more and more. There are more and more objects in orbit. So even though they are designed with a high level of reliability, you launch stuff into the atmosphere and then you just let them die. We have this concept of orbit service, in which we could have systems and devices that would have a longer lifetime. We would be able to fix them, and we would be able to provide services to them, in particular power. So, at the beginning we thought, okay, we're going to have to fill a tank, because, usually we used to do that with small engines. But of course you could imagine that we might go there and replace a battery. Why not? So if we're starting to consider this, having a plant to generate and to manage the energy up in the air would spare you 50 square meters of PV panels that would have to be planted on the Earth, But of course, if you have to be in orbit, you have to rendezvous with the satellite in orbit just to plug in the battery. Well, of course, it's complicated, but we have to look at things and see if it's worth it. There is another application for which we are almost certain that it would be beneficial. It's everything that's got to do with calculations, computing. Data centers on Earth are awful, because we spend a lot of energy to do this computing, and to cool them down. Of course, now we're setting them up in Greenland, but all this heat has to be cooled down. And systems in space consume a lot of computing power also. So especially if you're looking at satellites for Earth observation, the data is acquired by the satellites, and then the data is fed onto the Earth. There is a radio link usually that brings the data on Earth, and then the data is processed and computed in order to come up with interesting stuff about the Earth. In terms of energy consumption, it's not really optimized, especially since the connection is complicated. If you have stationary satellites, it's okay, because you just have to point at them. But if you have low-orbit satellites, it's more complicated, because they spend about 10 minutes in a visible and reachable area. But if you have a data center in orbit, well, then you can save a lot on heat dissipation. You won't need to have air conditioning systems, because they would just be cooled down naturally in space. You will also save on the efficiency of power generation, as I said, and also you might not have to repatriate all the data to process it on Earth. You could be able to process the data directly up there. And then you've got artificial intelligence and a whole kind of systems that would enable you to send back the processed information on Earth. Well, maybe we will have a lot of things happening in orbit that will be actually fueled by power plants in orbit too. I'm going to take a few more minutes, because I wanted to talk about the societal aspect of things. Because, France Territoire Solaire gave a vision for 2030 in which they're talking about 52,000 jobs for the solar industry. In ADEME, in October 23, you published an update of your report on markets and employment in climate change. Can you tell us where we stand in terms of jobs? Well, when you think about solar industry, you think about jobs in the manufacturing of equipment. Today, it's about 1,000 jobs in France. But of course, we are convinced that France could grow its PV industry. because we have other industries that can be included in the value chain. We have work on gas, on different kinds of equipment, but also low-carbon electricity that we have might give us an upside on the upstream phases. And also, as you said, it's important to see the environmental impact of what we are researching on. You know, at France 2030, we try to ensure that in our areas of research, we include the minimum impact on the environment that has to be looked for. Because this is the only way to develop projects in Europe and in the rest of the world. Now, the majority of jobs are in installation, and these graphs show you the chaotic history of photovoltaics for the past 10 to 15 years. You had this peak in 2010. It was because of the launch with a tariff at 200 euros per megawatt hour, etc. So today we are on a rising curve again, with the number of jobs for 2023 is somewhere along the lines of 22,500 full-time equivalents in France, mostly in installation, but also, as you can see in darker blue, for the operation phase. Because, I was trying to show you this. Because, of course, the fleet is growing, so you have to have more people to operate all these devices. Now, investment, that's the top left graph. I was talking about 100 billion euros by 2035. These are the numbers for 2021, 7 billion, 2023, 12 billion euros. And then at the bottom left is the installation pace. We are at more than 2.5 gigawatts per year. And as the minister said in her video, the objective is to at least multiply this twofold, which should create a lot of activity. And then, of course, you have to look at the quality of jobs and the skills related to that. And that's a big area of work. Well, this year we celebrated the 15th anniversary of Cali PV certification. What do you see about this, André Joffre? Well, actually, there is a demand for new certifications, and we feel that this is really happening. And if you want to attend a training to become a PV installer, you have to wait about 1 year, because they're totally. We have bookings for the whole of 2024 already, so it's complicated. We try to create more training slots, but we also are short of trainers, so we have to train the trainers before we can train the candidates. So, in general, there is a shortage of installers in the area, despite the increase in numbers. And that's a problem, because, you might think, well, okay, it's no big deal. The price of panels are decreasing. We are about to see French products coming out on the market, so let's take it easy. But, you also have eco-criminals. When there is a strong demand from the public, well, then you've got those people who do things, who advertise for things which are absolutely not legit. Sometimes they will capture people who are not too clever. There was the example of a guy who bought a solar installation for 300,000 euros, a private individual, And the son came to me and said, well, it was a scam. Wouldn't you like to maybe carry out an expertise to show that it was a mistake? Plus, it's not even working. That's the kind of things that can happen. Of course, I'm sure that's an extreme case. But, you have a lot of people who are there on the market selling poor quality products at a very high price, taking advantage of the ignorance of people. some people who are a little bit gullible. So we need to have a response. The response is to actually certify installers to make sure that the people would be would get a good service, after-sale service, etc. And this is really difficult. We conducted a study in the southwest of France, and we have a lot of new installers who are going to come on the market. It's coming, of course, but we need to work on that, and we must not let go in terms of the quality of the training. You know, after the persons are certified, after they've attended the training, they've passed some kind of a little exam, well, and then they have to demonstrate that they have the right insurance, etc. And then when they carry out their first installation, we go and visit the installation to make sure that it's proper, that it's been done correctly, and then we keep on monitoring and supervising those new certified installers. And we must not let go on that. Because, you know, sometimes people say, yes, but, you know, it's okay, it's all right, we have too many standards, we just have to let the market self-regulate itself. Well, no, because that would be too bad for the people who are trapped into that system. So we need to accelerate in terms of the training and certification. Pierre-Emmanuel, we're talking about jobs. How many jobs in your gigafactory? Well, direct jobs, 3,000 workers on the first gigafactory. If we go for a second one, it will be thousands of jobs. And then you've got the equipment, the raw material, glass, silicon, and all the indirect jobs, which will also be related to that. I think we have to stop there, right? Because it's lunchtime, but, you know, employment is important. And maybe we're not measuring this correctly, but we are also going to reconcile people in our country, because some people are not too enthusiastic about solar energy because they see that we don't have factories on the territory. You know, I was in wind power before going into photovoltaic. So you see France, which is made up of cities and villages which have lost their industrial fabric. And if you sell the promise of an abundant and cheap source of energy with in a hyper-connected world, well, we are going to lose the French people, because you know that climate skepticism is growing in France, and so a lot of people do not believe in the promise of solar power and the promise of transition. And so if we can't have the right factories with simple processes for simple people, well, it's never going to work. So we have factories which are mostly located in places which are remote from the city centers. Factories used to be located in the city centers, and so the commuting was pretty easy. You could take your bike or a tram or trolley bus. You know, in Boulogne-Billancourt, everybody was riding their bikes to work. When you live 40 kilometers from the factory where you work, you have to take your car. So maybe we need a solar program, a solar plan that would be supported and sponsored by the government, where you would actually give a benefit in kind to the people, like energy, power, to power their bikes or electric vehicles or whatever. And, you know, people are so remote from this so-called happy transition. It's not just how many direct or indirect jobs, it's just how we can put people back at the center of the decisions. People need jobs, and they just don't want to be working in Amazon centers or distribution centers. They want to work on technology, on technical items. And, you know, it's good that we have wind turbine factories, you know. And it's something that Germany did quite well. We have to inspire ourselves on that. The question of industry has to be at the heart of our transition policies. And this is also one of the upsides of the nuclear power. You know, it's so technical that jobs in the industrial sector are very well paid. compared to those in offices. We have to realize that, and we have to advertise for that. And and if we get attacked by the trade unions everywhere we try to go, it's not going to work. So we need to work on that, on the redeployment of industry, not just thinking about the big dreams of what we want to do with that. I think you're hungry. I would have liked to talk to you about the added value for rural areas with agrivoltaics, but you will have to discuss that over lunch. Thank you for enlightening us. Thank you for giving us information about all these aspects of photovoltaic power. Thank you. Thank you, Laetitia. Thank you for not adding more time because we're already behind schedule. Now you're going to go on the lunch break, and at 2 o'clock we're coming back and we will listen to Andreas Bett from the Fraunhofer Institute. He will be speaking in English. He will be speaking in English. So if you're a French speaker in the room and if you're not totally fluent in English, there is a simultaneous translation available. So you just need to grab a headset as you enter the room. So please come back here at 2 o'clock. So that means a quick lunch. Food is not the purpose of the day, right? So you grab a bite and then we're coming back here because it's food for thought that we actually need. So please come back at 2.